Okay, that on the record outside the presence of the jury, there was an issue with the media. They picked up one of the jurors, and what the court is going to indicate this, and the court, I know it was not intentional, but the phenomenon of live streaming, somehow when he picked up the screen, it picked up one of the jurors. So the court is going to indicate that with the live stream allowed, but nothing on the screen, only the judge, the prosecution, the defense. That is it. Nothing else. Nothing on that screen for anybody, because I think somehow that image was picked up because maybe that frame was larger than what it was, but we did have an opportunity to hear it exactly, so the court is going to indicate for the record. So we need to move. Can you move that camera? So we just.
Oh, yes, no, it wasn't a problem to shoot them. It was just if you go over like this, it looks like this to you, but it's like that.
Okay, you're good. You're not. Just, okay. All right, you're good. Let's just move it down.
All right, you may see that.
You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you. And good afternoon, jurors.
Good afternoon.
On behalf of myself, my co-counsel, and especially Robert Bashara, we thank you for your attention. This is the day, believe it or not, that Mr. Bashara has been waiting for, the day to get his side of the story out. Now, you've heard what the prosecutor said, and we are going to agree on some things, especially what she indicated in her opening. She said, defendant didn't know what Gentz was doing. We absolutely 100% agree with that statement. Now, there was a lot made and a lot talked about these witnesses. Let's start with this right here. I don't necessarily know if it was clear to you, but our opening arguments are what we expect the evidence to show. Not that we can say, this is what you have to believe. This is what we expect the evidence to show. We have Mr. Joe Gentz at the top. He is, in fact, the confessed killer of Mrs. Jane Bashara. Something that might not have been clear to you in the prosecutor's opening is that Steve Tavato is a friend of Mr. Gentz, and Mr. Steve Bergona is a friend of Mr. Gentz. Mr. Bashara is not on the pyramid. He's not on the hierarchy. Let's talk about the witnesses. We're going to have lots of witnesses in this case, and one of the instructions you're going to get from the judge, the credibility of the evidence or of the witness. Ask yourself, before each one of them testifies, and you'll come to find out why, does the witness have any bias or prejudice or any personal interest in how this case is decided? Now, I believe that Madam Prosecutor indicated that the police went where the evidence took them. We are going to parallel there. I believe day 1, 2, immediately after Mrs. Bashara is found slaughtered in her car. Mr. Bashara is named a person of interest. And not just a person of interest by a detective. This is the captain of the whole department. This is person of interest. So did you go where the evidence takes you, or did you take the evidence where you wanted it to go? Now, we're going to hear some talk. There's a lot of talk about this BDSM lifestyle, the alternative lifestyle. And I know it's a little crooked and I apologize. BDSM, this right here, and you've heard it, is one of the prosecutor's theories, if not the main theory for this particular homicide that occurred. Salacious? Absolutely. Add some kind of value to whom? I don't know. It's just not true. It's just not true. The expected testimony of Miss Lois Valente. This is someone that had been acquainted with Mrs. Bashara for about 20 years. They've done some of the same things, the Rotary Club, things of that nature. She had a conversation with Jane Bashara. Jane and I talked about their relationship, meaning Mr. and Mrs. Bashara's relationship. Jane basically said to me that Bob was getting into some weird sexual stuff lately, and that she wanted no part of it. Jane told him he could go do whatever he wanted to do. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's what the testimony will show about that BDSM. It may have all kinds of things that might interest and pull people in, but it has absolutely, and you will hear absolutely nothing that this BDSM lifestyle had to do with the homicide of Mrs. Jane Bashara. Also, it's taken about 3 years for us to get here today. And I know that we respect this court process. So when Mrs. Lindsay, or the prosecutor in this case, says that someone gets up and says, please, not guilty, this is the United States. The Constitution is something that you can't pick and choose to follow. Either you're going to go with the process, or you're going to say, we should just be someplace else. In America, that's how it goes. Step one. Now, but also,
Okay, that camera can't pick this up because it's gonna reflect it back. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, the camera.
okay. The solicitation to commit murder on Joe Gens. The prosecutor's theory is that it was to silence Joseph Gens. Once again, that's not true. You will hear from their witnesses, their own witnesses, that when this was discussed, it wasn't discussed to keep him from testifying against Mr. Bashara. It wasn't because the inflammatory language that was used about retard, it wasn't that. It was because this was the confessed murderer of his wife of 26 years. That is what you will hear when you listen to all of these taps, all of these tapes. I don't know how many calls. You're never going to hear Robert Bashara say, I wanted my wife killed. You're never going to hear that in his voice. Never. Then we're going to have some witnesses that are going to, I believe, get up on this witness stand. Paul Monroe might be one of them, Steve Vergona. Let's just look and see how many statements Mr. Paul Monroe has himself made. Mr. Paul Monroe is their witness. The first statement he gives, now remember, there's been extensive media coverage since day one. The first statement he gives, he does not indicate any wrongdoing. But maybe by statement 2, maybe by statement 3, maybe by the time they get to this investigative subpoena, which, by the way, doesn't have any defense attorney there. All these people ask you all these questions, then all of a sudden, maybe I feel like a star. Maybe for the first time I'm starting to feel special and integral to a process. Now, solicitation. We talked about that on Joe Bennett. The conspiracy to commit first-degree premeditated murder. To prove that, the prosecutor on this side.
Judge, may we approach?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, you just refresh.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
I'll allow it. But counsel, I will warn you, it is not closing on.
I know, Judge. And just so, in case you didn't understand, this is what, these are our arguments. This is what we suspect that the prosecutor is going to have to prove. This is not closing though. But in any event, the prosecutor in this case is going to have to try to show that Mr. Bashara knowingly agreed with someone, and I would guess that would be Mr. Dent's, to commit some kind of homicide. Hold them to their proofs. They've come here, they've said lots and lots of things. You know, this investigation spanned over 3 years. We anticipate and we expect that one of the things the prosecutor is going to say is, we went where the evidence took us. That's not true. Because the only place they went was right here. And we, to Mr. Bashara, and we anticipate that they're going to say who would act in such a manner. And we would anticipate that brief is specific to the person. I'm not going to talk to you a whole lot of time because the burden is only on the people of the state of Michigan. This is a very important case. What happened was an atrocity. What Mr. Dent's did was an atrocity, and we are going to agree on that, and then we're going to disagree on the method. And Ms. Lindsay said it was something that was very, very calculated. Didn't appear that way. It seemed as if the way, the untimely way, the unfortunate way that Ms. Bashara died was somebody that was lashing out. And we would all say certain things and maybe expect everything to be A, B, C, D. But this is life, ladies and gentlemen. Grief is what grief is. And if we look at this in a whole, keep your minds open. Listen to each witness that's going to sit here on this witness stand attentively. It's not a theory now. This is time for the second half of the story to be told. Listen to them. Ask yourself, does this make any logical kind of sense? You will have an opportunity to hear lots of tape, lots of recordings. But one thing you will not hear, Mr. Bashara said, out of his mouth, tape or otherwise, is that he wanted his wife killed because I want to be in this BDSM lifestyle with this young lady named Rachel Gillette. It's simply not true. If you will make note, the things that were presented by the prosecutor start at 2009. Mrs. Bashara deceases in 2012. I would ask that you listen with an open mind. Judge the facts, not the emotion because certainly we are all emotional about homicide. It's the worst thing that can ever happen. God's laws, man's laws. They have the burden on this right here. They are the ones that said, this is what we're going to charge, this is how we're going to charge it. And as far as some of the testimony that they say has changed, we can look at Mr. Robert Fick. He'll come in here, and I believe he was one of the people that they interviewed. And they said Mr. Bashara had something to do with Mr. Robert Fick. After that, he finishes talking to the prosecutor, and I believe it was maybe four of them around, maybe some of these wonderful police officers here as well. He had to go to the hospital. And then he finishes up his investigative subpoena on another day, I believe a month later. Very heavy-handed prosecution. We're here now. We're thankful for you. I'm not going to talk to you forever. But this was a very, and the evidence will show it, very heavy-handed prosecution from day one. And heavy-handed doesn't mean guilty. Heavy-handed means we just have a lot of power on this side. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. This is what we're going to do. We're going to recess. I'll see you back promptly at 2 o'clock. The court is going to indicate that the live stream is done. Thank you so much. Knock at the door and you're ready to go.
All right, Mr. Jerry.
Thank you. We have to see the shows. Yes, ma'am. All right. Up here.
Okay.